Hi everybody, this is Matthew's Movie Mentions, week 48. So movies up to the December 3rd. We are now in the end game, you might say, coming towards the end of the year and just trying to get towards that 365 new films for the year. So it's a little bit late. Life is a little crazy at the moment, and the run up to Christmas is always a bit manic. So I'm a couple of days out. Sorry about that. This week we are talking about Carol, 12 Years a Slave, Miracle on 34th Street, Feminists, What Were They Thinking?, The Pink Panther, MASH, Strange Days, Wind River, Three Colors Blue, Date Night, Ida, Hurricane Bianca, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Ocean's 8, The Greatest Showman, Paris is Burning, Truth, Detroit, and Lady Bird. There's a lot to cover, so I'm not going to go into too much detail for some of these. Carol, it came up on the Letterboxd Christmas showdown, which surprised me. I didn't realise this was even at Christmas. So it made me go, perhaps I should check that one out. And I am delighted that I did. The performances are great, the romance is really touching, and all round it's a really well done film. 12 Years a Slave is another Oscar winner that I'm pleased to have seen. It's a very hard film, but at the same time, it's unlike anything else I've seen from that period. It's a story that I don't think I've seen represented elsewhere, so it's really, really good and very well done all round. Miracle on 34th Street, this is the 1994 remake. We discussed it on the 100th episode of Pop Culturally Deprived. It's not bad, but overall I don't think the film knows who the audience is. Some of it I think is good for children, about the niceness of the season and Christmas, and some of it is for adults. It's about belief and optimism, but ultimately I don't think it satisfies either. Feminists, What Were They Thinking? I was a bit disappointed with, I will admit. It's very much a retrospective on this one element of feminism from, I think, the 70s, 60s and 70s. I think the problem is that it's compared to other documentaries I've watched this year, like Misrepresentation. It feels like there wasn't opportunity here for education about feminism as it was and as it has evolved that's been missed. The scope of this film was actually very small. The Pink Panther, I've always put off seeing, and I think I can now justify having put it off. The film is not as funny as it thinks it is, and the bedroom farce elements of it, they go on forever. And then ultimately the ending is just a bit weird and a bit lackluster. MASH, almost similar. I think the film would work better if, certainly the two leads, Sutherland and Gould, if they were more charismatic or sympathetic, and they're people who actually tried to have fun. These guys are just looking to entertain themselves in some really dark ways. I think the story, because it's lots of stories together, it would work better in smaller chunks, maybe having the opportunity to focus on different elements of the ensemble every so often. Maybe more like a TV show, it would be better. Strange Days, there's a kernel of a good idea here, but I think the film looked and felt a bit aged when it came out 20 plus years ago, and time has not helped this one really at all. Wind River, a film that had a strong feeling of something like Insomnia, for various reasons. I mean, obviously the setting was very reminiscent, but that kind of sort of strung out feeling and not quite being sure because the environment is so alien. The performances were really good, but I think there was a bit of the white saviour trope going on in here. And then there's a flashback inserted into the film that doesn't help it at all. I don't think it needs to be there. I think there was probably a neater way to have given us some of that information. Three Colors Blue was a really gripping piece about the journey through grief for Juliette Binoche, and I was up with it until there's this sort of Deus Ex Machina moment in the middle that then changes the focus onto the dead husband and his story, and it took away a little bit, I think, from what we were getting up to that point, which was a bit of a shame for me. Date Night, very reminiscent of Keeping Up with the Joneses and Game Night, although I think this might have come first. There were some very funny moments, some clever stuff. The car stuff I quite enjoyed, but I think the marketing for this film made it seem like it was going to be even crazier and madder than it was, and actually the leads don't really go through as much as it's implied they're going to. Ida has a lot of acclaim for interesting cinematography, extended shots, the quietness of the film, but I feel a little bit let down because the stylized way in which it was made means nothing. It actually doesn't add an extra layer to understanding it. It doesn't provoke an idea of the emotional response of these characters. It's just filmed in an interesting manner. It felt like the director of photography, one of them had a good idea, so they decided to do it, but they didn't think, how can we make this relate to the film we're actually making? Hurricane Bianca, I was really looking forward to, because it did look like a lot of fun, but ultimately very disappointed. It was shot in a very odd fashion. The camera was very often too high or too low, or not focused on the performer well enough, and the crux of the film was very much, if you're mean and sassy at people, it means you'll succeed, and they won't be able to, you shouldn't be nice to them. There was nothing about Bianca that actually made me think she was a good teacher or a good friend. It was all just about the one-liners and smart mouth on everyone. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, I think I'm not dark or nihilistic enough for this film. The end recontextualizes everything that's come before, which I really like in a film. I love when you see that, but this film was very much the Coen brothers doing what the Coen brothers do. They just turned it way up to 11, and it was a bit too much for me, sadly. Ocean's 8, overall, really enjoyable film. Good performances, a fun heist, very stylish. It's a shame that there's no real conflict or crisis throughout the film. It just kind of happens in front of you, but looks good whilst doing it. The Greatest Showman, I had much higher expectations compared to what I got. The characters in this film are just so poorly written. You could overlook that if it was a stylish musical, but the music is not good. You've got, one of the parts of the story is this world-famous opera singer who comes and performs in the US. But in this film, she performs a song like a pop singer. That's not quite right. She's not performing it. She's singing it like it's a pop song. And it's slightly jarring. And like I say, the characters are just really poorly written. There's no sense of why Zac Efron falls in love with Zendaya, and there's no real detail on, well, most of the women in the film in general, but the romances and some of the relationships, they just do not hold together at all. And the film itself is largely on rails from that opening moment where you see everything being a success through to the crisis, and then, hey, everything is a success. So, a shame. I expected a lot more from that. Paris is Burning is a fascinating insight into a world that I knew absolutely nothing about. There are a lot of people talking in this film, but it does give them all the space so you can understand the differences between the people who are talking and their attitudes towards it, the challenges they each face, and you do get a sense of triumph from them. It is fairly affirming without really going to be... I don't think the film wants to do that, but I think it does get there. Truth is yet another real-life story set in a journalistic world. The film throws up a lot of red herrings throughout it, things that look like they're going to come to something but don't, and it's almost like it's trying to use them to force some drama in somewhere, which just makes me think you could have excised them from the film. It would have been a bit tighter, less dramatic, but it felt like padding, which is not a good state of affairs. Detroit is one of the tensest films I think I've ever seen. It is superbly well put together. It makes you feel like you are in the room with these characters, and because I didn't know what happened, I was wrapped. I did not know what was going to happen to the story as it went through its climax. I had the relief of what actually happens in the room, as it were, and then when you see the climax of the film with the court case and everything, and it's slightly appalling. The message within it is still very relevant, and I think that speaks to how well crafted this film is to speak to modern ideologies and situations within the US. And Lady Bird is one of the better coming-of-age stories that I've seen. It is honest almost to a fault. Every character, you get to see every side of them. There is a really interesting way of telling the story where you would have put the mother as the focus in the centre of the film to change what we see, and I think it would have been equally as gripping. I was disappointed by the very end of the film. I feel like there's 5 or 10 minutes that could have been cut from it and it would have been stronger, but I see what they're also doing about growing through life, so... My recommendation this week, I think Carol is the film I must recommend. It is rare to see such a pure, good romance that also carries real weight for our characters and has genuine consequences for them. and the characters themselves are gripping. They were so fleshed out. They felt so real. It really made the film something to watch. So I'm almost there with the 365. I think I am going to do it probably just before Christmas. Lots of films still to watch, but if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see me updating what I've watched. And I'll be back next week, week 49, with a lot more films to tell you about.